All right, you guys, welcome back to the podcast. Today we are looking at a little bit of a heavier topic. So, a couple of weeks ago, there was a shooting at Apalachee High School in Georgia. We briefly looked over this last week, but I want to go into a little bit more detail, not necessarily in regards to this shooting in particular, but have more of a broad conversation about what is going on with all of these school shootings, shootings just in general. And then also I want to look at, there's a couple stories about abortion going around because those two topics make sense to go together. Absolutely. But before we get into any of that, this is your reminder to subscribe to this channel, give this video a thumbs up. If you are listening on Spotify, make sure you leave a rating and a review over there. All of my other social medias are linked down below as always. And with all of that, my name is Noelle. This is Just Say No. Let's get into it. So as you know by now, I will not be mentioning the name of this school shooter. I try to do my best to not add to the recognition of these people. Like, that's my goal in not mentioning names, because when someone commits an act like this, part of it is that they're seeking notoriety, and I do not want to contribute. So I'm going to briefly go over the schedule as we understand it. The shooter was a 14-year-old boy who had just started his freshman year. He arrived to school, and I believe what is said is that he left his algebra class. I could be incorrect, but I believe it was his math class at around 9:45, and then the shooting started at 10:22. And by 10:26, what is reported is that he was confronted by an armed school resource officer, and he surrendered. So just 4 minutes later, which is excellent time. Now, there's a couple of reasons for the very rapid response. The first and most obvious is the fact that there were already armed guards on the campus. They had off-duty deputies from the local sheriff's department on the campus as resource officers. And these were the people who confronted the shooter and put that he surrendered to. So they didn't have to wait for the police to get to the school because the police were already there. Another thing that I found to be interesting was that a week before the shooting, they had introduced a new security measure called Centajix. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. I actually have no idea. I'll put it on the screen here for you. Essentially what it is imagine a life alert for old people. They have that button on a necklace that they wear. If they fall, they just push the button and help comes. It's very similar to that. It is a button that can be embedded into the school's faculty ID cards. So they have it around their neck. And so when the shooting started, there was a dozen teachers, I imagine, that all pressed that button, and that sent out a notice to the sheriff's department that there was an active shooter so that they could rapidly respond. So they didn't have to wait for somebody to find a phone or do any of this. I think that this is a very, very impressive and smart security measure. I really am a fan of this. But of course, having armed security already on the grounds is the reason why this shooting only lasted for 4 minutes. And that is probably the thing that saved as many lives as it did. So that's kind of the gist of what happened. And it always feels like with these kinds of shootings, it's always the exact same story, copy and pasted. And so I kind of want to look at it from a different angle today. Like clockwork, a story like this comes out and immediately we're talking about guns and gun control. And I do feel like over the last couple of years, we have been more intentional and better about addressing mental health, but I do not think that we address it enough at all. And so that's kind of what I want to look at today, is look at it from a different angle, because my hot take is that we do not have a gun problem. We have a mental health problem. According to the NCHS, SSRI usage is up 400% in the US from a time period of 1988 to 1994 to 2000 and 2008. And I imagine that it's up even more in today, 2024, seeing as how presently there are over 43 million people in the US on antidepressants. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that correlation is causation. I am just introducing a potential other factor, right? This conversation is simply not broad enough. We simply are not looking at all of the different factors that are going into this problem that we have. It's such a tragic event, and it's deeply terrifying and causes a ton of anxiety, understandably, that we immediately just jump to the guns. We say get rid of the guns, and that's not going to fix anything. We're not getting to the root of what is actually going on here. Because when we look at school shooters, it's always the same story. We have a loner kid, antisocial, cannot make friends, often depressed. It's almost always the same stereotypical kid. And that is the type of kid who often ends up on SSRIs. And as somebody who has in the past taken her fair share of them, I can tell you that yes, they do make the bad times feel less bad, but they also make the good times feel less good. There's a certain amount of detachment that comes from your emotions when you are on these prescription drugs. And I imagine that that kind of detachment, that kind of numbness makes it a little bit easier to carry out such a horrific act. And also it's a double-sided issue, right? Because what, if we really want to get to the root cause of it, what is going on in our country that is leading this many young people to be on SSRIs? That isn't normal either. I think we also have a family issue in America. More and more couples are getting divorced, leaving their children in split households, which is obviously not an ideal circumstance for any child. They're either going to be missing their mother or their father, which are two of the most vital roles in a kid's development. I think we can also look at social media. I think that it's universally agreed upon throughout various studies that this is having a negative impact on young teenagers. It impacts their self-confidence. It increases anxiety and depression. It changes the way that they interact socially because they're not interacting socially anymore. They're interacting electronically. It changes their attention span. It touches every single aspect of a child's brain and the way that it's developing and working, and it makes it not work the way that it's supposed to. But all of these issues can compound and lead a child to walk into a doctor's office saying that they have anxiety and depression. And of course, because we live in a pharmaceutical country, that doctor's not going to take a look at the diet or the home life or social media usage. They're not going to look at any of these things that could be remedied. They're going to immediately say, well, let's get you on an antidepressant. Let's look at some anti-anxiety medication because a medicated child makes money, is profitable. And I don't believe we know long-term what these drugs, what kind of impact they're having on a developing brain. Because if you start antidepressants, SSRIs at a young age and take them throughout your childhood, your brain's not going to develop the way that it was intended to. SSRIs literally change the brain chemistry. And if you don't think that that's impacting or changing throughout development, then I don't know what to tell you, because it is. That feels like one of the most obvious things I've ever said on this channel. Now, again, I'm not saying that this is the reason for school shootings. I just wanted to introduce another possible factor, because school shootings and shootings in general happen frequently in our country, and we are obviously missing a piece of the puzzle here, and there's a large piece of the puzzle that's not being addressed. And like I think we talked about this last week, when we focus on the guns, we're not really going to get anywhere. But that's kind of all that I have to say about that. As I mentioned at the top, we're going to talk about some abortion stories as well, because these two stories are making their rounds over the last week or two, and I want to talk about them. So we've obviously covered and talked about abortion on this channel, but I don't think that we've ever looked at it from this angle. So I'm excited to do that, because I've been making political content for over 3 years now, and this is something that this is a point that I've continuously tried to make, but I never really felt like I got to flesh it out, because I never had a long form media to do that. And so I'm excited to dive into this. About a week or two ago, these stories started going around, one of which was that a mother named Amber Thurman lost her life due to medical malpractice. Now, that should be what the headline reads, but of course, that's not what the headline reads, because that is just simply not the political climate in which we live. Instead, we are force-fed that pro-life laws have taken another life. So I essentially want to look at, is that true? I want to get to the bottom of what's actually happening here, because when I read something like that, I'm always skeptical because every single time I've ever looked into it, it's turned out to be false. So, and this is not any different. So let's start off by making the obvious statement that this is a tragic story, no matter what, no matter how this is spun, no matter which angle you look at this from. A young woman, a mother of a 6-year-old boy, lost her life when she absolutely did not need to. The point of talking about it is not to dispute the fact that she shouldn't have died, because there's no reason why this woman should not be alive today. I'm just looking at the reason that people are pointing to in the media is not the correct one. So to get to the root of it, this story takes place in Georgia, and Georgia has a heartbeat bill. And a heartbeat bill, for those who don't know, is an abortion law that says the abortion is illegal past the point of the baby having a heartbeat. Which, I mean, you guys know I'm pro-life. That makes sense to me. The baby inside of you now has a heartbeat. It has its own wholly separate little heart that is beating individually of yours. On the flip side, a lot of pro-choicers say that this is very wrong because a lot of women don't know that they are pregnant that early. A heartbeat is usually detectable around the 6th week of pregnancy. And apparently that's too early to know that you're pregnant, according to pro-choicers, but that's just simply not true if you're responsible. But that's kind of what the abortion debate comes down to, isn't it? Is just kind of a lack of responsibility. But that's not the thing we're getting into today. Now, of course, there are exceptions, and I hate to have to give that disclaimer every time we talk about anything, but I just know that there's a goof-ass out there who's going to be screaming at the screen saying, I have an irregular period. You don't understand. It's difficult. Okay, congratulations. You get a sticker. You're special. But you can still be responsible and monitor this type of thing. If you know that you have an irregular period and you're having sex, especially if you're having unprotected sex, don't you think that you would have extra caution about pregnancy? Don't you think that that would be something that you would monitor extra closely? Again, it comes down to being just hyper irresponsible. You don't just accidentally conceive a baby in 99% of the cases. You elected to engage in the activity in which a baby can be made. And people are like, oh, I didn't mean to get pregnant. I didn't mean to get pregnant. Yeah, I know you didn't mean to, but you did the thing that leads to it. And the reality is that pregnancy is detectable as early as 2 weeks after conception. Your body starts releasing pregnancy hormones, which is the thing that makes a pregnancy test show up positive. So if you are engaging in unprotected sex or even protected sex, like, I just don't understand how people are out here being promiscuous and not giving any thought to the fact that they could create a baby. I mean, are we so far gone as a society that we have literally detached sex from making a baby? Because hello, it's just irresponsible. What it comes down to is you're irresponsible. Like, how I digress. The point, I think I've made the point that I want to make. It just sincerely blows my mind how you're just going to be out here doing all of these extracurriculars and not checking your work. My God. But regardless, let's move on. Let's take a look at Georgia's abortion bill, right? Because in such cases, it's probably best to not trust CNN or Fox News. It's probably best to just go straight to the source. So, per the bill, the following exceptions are defined as: a medical emergency means a condition in which an abortion is necessary in order to prevent the death of the pregnant woman or the substantial and irreversible physical impairment of a major bodily function of the pregnant woman. No such greater risk shall be deemed to exist if it is based on a diagnosis or claim of a mental or emotional condition of the pregnant woman, or that the pregnant woman will purposefully engage in conduct which she intends to result in her death, or in substantial and irreversible physical impairment of a major bodily function. So basically, this is saying if the woman's going to die, abortion is okay. If something's going to happen maybe destroy her ability to have children in the future. Let's say an abortion is okay. If the woman is saying that having a baby will give her anxiety, abortion is not okay. Does that make sense? So that's what that first part is saying. Next, medically futile, which means in reasonable medical judgment, an unborn child has a profound and irremediable congenital or chromosomal anomaly that is incompatible with sustaining life after birth. In layman's terms, what that means is there is no chance that this baby is going to survive outside of the womb. Abortion's okay. The third one, spontaneous abortion, means the naturally occurring death of an unborn child, including a miscarriage or a stillbirth, meaning baby is already dead inside of the womb. And here are those things in practice in the bill. So those were the definitions, because if you haven't ever looked at a bill, what they will do is they will have a part where it defines the terms for that section. So terms that are used throughout that portion of the bill, they will have a part saying, when you see this in the bill, this is what it means. That was what we just read. Now, in practice in the bill, no abortion is authorized or shall be performed if an unborn child has been determined in accordance with Code Section 319B2 to have a detectable heartbeat. So that is the heartbeat bill, right? But then it says except when, because for your information, if you did not know, there's not a single state that does not have exceptions. Every state does, even the most pro-life states, which Georgia is probably the most. So except when, here, section 1, a physician determines in reasonable medical judgment that a medical emergency exists. So that term medical emergency, we would refer back up to our definition, and that is what that means. 2, the probable gestational age of the unborn child is 20 weeks or less, and the pregnancy is a result of rape or incest. So here it says if you have been raped or there's incest involved, you have 20 weeks. So that's pretty interesting and actually rather inconsistent of Georgia, but we're not going to get into that at the moment. Or 3, a physician determines in reasonable medical judgment that the pregnancy is medically futile. And you might notice here that spontaneous abortion is not mentioned. And the reason is because this says no abortion is authorized to be performed. And if you are evacuating a dead baby, that is not an abortion. The definition of abortion is the intentional killing of an unborn child. If the child is already dead, then it is not an abortion, which is why you do not see that in this section here. So what this establishes is that a physician is protected by law to save the mother, and is actually even protected in terms of performing an abortion if that baby is non-viable, will not live. So with that established, if there were such a case where the mother is going to die, then it would become medical malpractice for that doctor to not fulfill his or her duty and save the mother's life by performing an abortion. Are you starting to see where we're going with this? I want to look at a couple of articles talking about Nicole's case just to see how they put it. So this one here, this is so funny. It's first of all, we must talk about this portion here. As was horribly predictable in a country where Black women seek abortions at higher rates and die far more commonly from maternal health complications, she was Black, because that matters so much. Okay, so she died because doctors in Georgia did not perform a routine procedure to remove tissue retained after a medical abortion. She wanted a procedural abortion in Georgia, but was forced by the state's 6-week ban to travel 4 hours away to North Carolina, where she missed her appointment because of standstill traffic. The clinic offered her a medical abortion instead. At 9 weeks, she was well within the standard of care for that treatment. The complication she suffered is rare and can be treated with a routine procedure. She died because her home state of Georgia had made that routine procedure a felony. That is a lie. The medical procedure required to save her life is absolutely not a felony in Georgia, and any doctor operating under the assumption that it is should have their medical license revoked because they are not mentally competent. The procedure that she needed was a D&C. This is where a doctor goes in and removes the rest of the tissue that is left over when a baby passes. Now, there are abortions that are performed through a D&C. That is typically a procedural abortion, which is what Amber was seeking at at the start of this. But again, as we have established, if the baby has already passed away, then it is not an abortion. And at that point, because what was happening was the entirety of the baby's tissue had not evacuated from Amber's body on its own. And she was going into septic shock because, yes, a dead, rotting carcass in your body is probably not healthy. It probably is not good for you. And at that point, this is now a life-saving procedure that is wholly separate from an abortion. And the hospital failed at their medical duty and should be held liable. This hospital should be sued into oblivion. They were wrong. They screwed up. I'm just saying that it does not have anything to do with the abortion law. And you know what? I will grant this, because there will be people who say that the only reason that doctors didn't perform it is because they were afraid of the abortion law. And in that sense, I guess you're right. It does have to do with the abortion law. But just because there are dumbasses who can't comprehend anything that they're reading does not make it the fault of the literature of the bill. It is the fault of the person who has no reading comprehension. So that was not the only article that referred to this as a felony. I personally read 3 wholly separate articles that referred to this as referred to the DNC as being a felony. This one here at least was kind of honest. The Life Act prohibits administering any instrument with the purpose of terminating a pregnancy. That made performing this normally commonplace and safe procedure a possible felony for doctors. The use of the word possible makes them, I guess, kind of honest. But where they say it prohibits administering any instrument with the purpose of terminating a pregnancy, you guys, I want to scream. The pregnancy was already terminated. That is the point. Like, I don't understand how these people, like, how people are not grasping this and don't understand this point. Because to me, it's the most obvious thing in the entire world. Because at the point in which she reached the hospital, she already met 2 important criteria that would make DNC legal. The baby was no longer alive. And 2, her life was in jeopardy. And I do want to try and steelman this a little bit. If we go back to the bill where it says the definition for medical emergency, where it says, or that the pregnant woman will purposefully engage in conduct which she intends to result in her death or in the substantial or irreversible physical impairment. I guess some could argue that her having this medical abortion was her engaging in something that could result in her death, but she didn't do it intentionally. The articles themselves say that this was a rare complication. But even if they would have deemed that to be true, when you go back down to the bill, it says no abortion shall be performed. And again, I have to hammer this in. The baby was no longer alive. The baby has already passed on. So the abortion bill, the abortion laws do not apply any longer, because this is no longer an abortion, because an abortion is the intentional killing of a baby inside the womb. I don't know how to make this any more obvious. What I don't understand is why some doctors decide to play politics and let people die, because that is, I guess that's the more aggressive interpretation of what happened here. The more generous one would be that they simply don't understand the bills in which they are operating under, which is potentially more terrifying, because that means that we have just completely incompetent people in positions of medical power, which is horrific. But this woman was wrongly told that having a medical abortion was safe, and then the medical professionals around her failed her. And that is the tragedy of this story. But there is a second case that is going on around Amber Thurman, and that is the case of Candy Miller, which in some cases is, to me, a little bit more tragic, because what happened here was it was a very similar case in the sense of she too had complications from a medical abortion pill that she was given. I believe she ordered hers online. But what's different about Candy Miller's case is that she didn't even try to go to the hospital, because she was reportedly so afraid of the abortion ban laws that she was scared she would get in trouble, arrested maybe. I'm not quite sure what she was afraid of. It's just reported that she was afraid. So she just stayed home. She took some ibuprofen to deal with the pain, and she died. And I am not being dramatic when I say that the people I blame for this are Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton, AOC, all of the women who have spent the last 3 years telling women that they are going to die because they can't access abortions, telling women that this is the end of their reproductive freedom, telling women that this is the end of life as they know it, instilling this sense of fear in them and not telling them the truth, not taking the time to actually explain what is in these bills. They politicized this, and this woman is dead because of that. If Kamala Harris had taken the time to explain this bill to women, say, you know what, it is, from her point of view, it is a shame that you only have 6 weeks, but these are the measures that you can take to abide by that law safely. And in such cases where something like Candy's situation comes up, these are your paths forward. You are well within your legal and your legal rights to seek medical care. If they had taken the time to be honest instead of play politics, Candy Miller would be alive. They scared this woman so badly that she didn't even try to seek medical care. There is a not 0% chance that she was going into septic shock, which I imagine is very painful. And she didn't even try to seek medical care because Kamala Harris scared her that bad. That is the tragedy of that story. Because the reality is just like we outlined for Amber Thurman, she was well within her rights to go seek medical care. And one more point that I want to make, because I find this to be odd, both of these women died in 2022. So tell me why we are having this conversation now. Is it maybe because there's an election in a couple of months? And this is what I'm talking about when I say that this is so politicized. If Kamala Harris really cared about these abortion laws, then this would have been made a huge deal in 2022. And if they did talk about it when it happened, they didn't talk about it the way that they're talking about it now. I've seen so many posts. So if you look this up right now, every article is from the last, well, at the time that I'm recording this, which is September 19th, every article is from the last 24 hours. They made this a story now. You actually think that they give a shit about women's rights? Women's reproductive freedoms? It's political. They're playing you. They're manipulating you. And they're lying to you. And they're lying to women so much that women are afraid and dying in their houses because they won't go seek medical care. It's disgusting. Because then they sit there and say that it's Trump's fault. But you guys, that is all that I have for you today. That's all that I can handle for today. We talked about 2 very deep topics, 2 very big topics. So thanks for sticking around. If you made it to the end of the video, I really appreciate it. Once again, make sure that you like this video, subscribe to this channel, and also that I post a second video on my YouTube channel every Thursday. So make sure that you check that out as well. And I will talk to you guys next Monday. Bye.